When I was a wee lad, when I was a young child, and I played video games, for the most part, I would play games on the PC. And it was mostly edutainment games. I played a lot of the humongous entertainment games. You know, stuff like Putt Putt and Spy Fox. Some of you will know what that is. I imagine most of you are gonna be like, what in the world is that, right? But anyway, needless to say, many years as a child, I didn't really have a main console to myself. And that really changed when one day my cousin gifted to me his Game Boy Color. And he gave me two games, Pokemon Yellow and Pokemon Gold. Now, I think I briefly played Pokemon Yellow, but if you know anything about Generation 1, it's pretty old and it's pretty difficult to get through. And when I popped in Pokemon Gold, something just kind of clicked for me on the fun factor. It's being an enjoyable experience. To put it very simply, Generation 2 in Pokemon is basically just a straight up improvement of everything done in Generation 1. Like if you were gonna go back to the Game Boy Color and play any of the old Pokemon games, I would personally recommend that you just kind of skip Generation 1 and just go straight to Generation 2. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Generation 1 had a lot of glitches and a lot of aspects to the programming didn't quite work correctly like the way they were supposed to. So if you were curious to play a Game Boy Color game for Pokemon, I would recommend this one. Play Crystal. Crystal is the definitive way to play Generation 2. So what do I mean by the fact that Generation 2 is an improvement of Generation 1? Well, for one, this is a Game Boy Color game. That means this comes in color. So that was actually a decent deal back then because the original Game Boy, it was just kind of like black and white. It was more green, but there was no color for the original Game Boy because it was basically calculator power. It was an interesting philosophy on Nintendo's part that they were like, all right, let's take something affordable like a calculator and let's see what we can do with this kind of technology. Can we make something great, right? And the original Game Boy didn't really do super successfully until Pokemon Generation 1 came out. So really, Pokemon was the Game Boy seller. That's what got people to buy that system. In Pokemon Gold, everything is in color, so everything automatically looks more inviting and more enjoyable. The sprites and the animations for all of the Pokemon is also much better. Because if you look at Generation 1 sprites, a lot of those look kind of funky and kind of weird. They look a little goofy. If you don't believe me, just go and pull up some sprites for Generation 1 and you'll see what I mean. But in Generation 2, the sprites were remade or redrawn to look a lot more like the anime. It's a lot more appealing to the eyes. I still think the Generation 2 sprites are beautiful. Like, I still can look at them now and still enjoy them. Which is also interesting because it's basically pixel art, but it's really good pixel art. In Pokemon Gold and Silver, you just kind of had the static sprite. Then Crystal was made after those games and you had the animation. There was a brief animation that would play for every single Pokemon when it came out. And that little bit of animation did give a lot of life to the Pokemon. And as a personal opinion for myself, I know people kind of complain about this often, so you might kind of fall under one camp or the other. The modern models in the modern games, sometimes they can look a bit lifeless, especially when Pokemon started to do 3D models. They just kind of stand there and they don't have a whole lot of personality to them. But in the earlier generations, I would say from Generation 2 upwards to Black and White 2, the sprites gave a lot of personality to each and every Pokemon. Like when you looked at it, you could kind of get a sense of like, okay, this is the personality or this is the character that this Pokemon has. And I think to some degree, that shows how the limitations of the Game Boy, the limitations of the older technology, really made artists and game developers push with their imagination, push with their tools to be more creative. Because the more modern that technology becomes, the less need there is for imagination because you can just rely on the tools to make everything look good. Whereas back then, you had to really depend on your creativity and your imagination to make something look amazing or excellent. Now, when I was a kid playing Pokemon Gold on my Game Boy Color, this was at a time when the DS was already out, and they were probably already out with Generation 4. So this was about 2007, 2008. And even then, I still really enjoyed Pokemon Gold, and I think that says something about the quality of this game. Now, to be fair, if you play this game now, you could probably still enjoy it if you're not too picky with your games. But if you're accustomed to quality of life features, especially the ones that are in Pokemon now, you're probably going to really struggle with this game to have all of that taken away. For me, I enjoyed this game so much, and I played it almost all the time. I mean, for one, it was on the Game Boy Color, so I could take this system with me wherever I went, and I did. You know, when my parents would go and volunteer at church, I wasn't really needed during those volunteer times, but my parents took me with them, and so instead of just kind of sitting around being a bit bored, I always had my Game Boy Color to play Pokemon, and easily I put 100 plus hours into Pokemon Gold. And I have a lot of fond memories of just playing Pokemon Gold. It would be really nice if I could see my old save file, but for those of you who have Game Boy Color games and cartridges, right, you probably already know that the Game Boy cartridges had a battery, and those batteries basically were what kept your save files alive. So once that battery dies, your save file is effectively deleted. And so one day I popped in Pokemon Gold into my Game Boy, and lo and behold, my 100 plus hour save file for Pokemon Gold was gone. And effectively, I never got to say goodbye to Feraligatr, but it is what it is. He's digital, it's okay. Now, one of the things that really sets this game apart from other Pokemon games is that in Generation 2, as far as I understand, this was the one time where they had 2 generations, 2 regions in one game. So when you go to the Johto region in this game, once you beat everything in Johto, you defeat the 8 gym leaders and you defeat the Elite 4, then you gain access to Kanto. And for people who played Red and Blue before Gold and Silver, this was a really nice callback, a really nice return to an older region, and you could battle the Kanto gym leaders once again. And I think for players who played Generation 1 and 2, it was kind of a nice nod to, I guess in a sense, personal growth. This sense of like, you know, look how you beat the game in Kanto, and look how much you've grown as a Pokemon trainer, right? As a gamer. And that really culminates in the end game of this game. When you fight Red is the character that you played in Generation 1. And so when you're fighting him, you're effectively fighting yourself. You're effectively fighting a past version of yourself. And it's supposed to be, and I think in a sense, a call to how much progress you've made in this game. How much progress you've made as a trainer. Now at the time, I hadn't played Generation 1, so I beat all of Kanto and I beat Red. And the game doesn't really tell you who these characters are. But even then, I still had the sense of like, okay, there's probably something significant about these gym leaders and Red. And once I figured it all out, it all made sense. Of course, a common criticism that you'll hear about this game is that the Kanto region is pretty sparse. A lot of the Pokemon that you find in the wild are pretty low level. The gym leaders, the Kanto gym leaders, are also a bit low leveled in comparison to the Elite Four. But, you know, I kind of give the game a break, and I'm understanding because bear in mind this is a Game Boy cartridge, there's not a lot of memory on that system. And additionally, you know, of course, you don't want to spend too much time putting effectively 2 games into one. So I'm forgiving of this game for that. Now bear in mind, a lot of the problems that are in Generation 2 in this game are fixed in the remake for the DS, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Those games are so good. When I played Heart Gold, again, I easily put 500 plus hours into that game. I won't talk too much about that today, but maybe someday down the future. God willing, right? One small thing that I wanted to say about Pokemon Gold is that it's really impressive what you can do with the power of a calculator. I really appreciate that Nintendo had this philosophy of, let's see what we can do with this limited technology. Let's see how we can perfect it and make it excellent and enjoyable. And I really appreciate that aspect. Another thing very unique to Pokemon Gold and Silver is that this is what introduced shiny Pokemon. Of course, in this game you get the shiny Gyarados, a shiny red Gyarados, and with that one decision that Game Freak made, that spawned a whole bunch of players that became shiny hunters. It created a whole community, essentially, right? That one decision. So it's really interesting how just that one small change kind of changed the game in a whole new way for a community of people. Now, would I recommend that you play Generation 1 and 2? Would I recommend that you play Gold and Silver? Yes and no. Yes, I would recommend it if you're willing to play a Game Boy Color game, and I would definitely recommend that you play Crystal, because Crystal is a refined version, a definitive version of Generation 2. Now bear in mind there are some problems with this game. For one, there's a decent amount of grind. Like, the way that I get past the grind, for the most part, I will just solo the game. I will just pick Totodile, that's my favorite one of all time, evolve him up to Feraligatr, and I'll use him most of the time, so that he's strong enough to destroy everything in his path. It's not the funnest way to play the game, honestly, but it does reduce a whole lot of grind. If you want to create a balanced team, you're either going to have to be smart and clever with it to avoid the least amount of grind as possible, or you're going to have to limit your team to about 3 or 4 Pokemon, which is also something that I've done before. And one way you can limit the grind is you can use the Pokemon that you trade in this game with some of the game's NPCs. So like, for example, you can use Electrode and Machoke, because those you can get from NPC trainers in this game. And as far as I can tell, I think the reason why this game is grindy is because it seems like there's not enough experience points to go around when it comes to the trainers that you fight, especially in between Gym 8 and Johto and the Elite Four, as well as between the Kanto Gym 8 and the final trainer Red. There's something about there not being enough experience points to get your Pokemon to the level that they need to be, especially spread throughout. So it's a lot easier to just funnel all of the XP into either one Pokemon or a team of 3 and 4, or you can just stick with the Pokemon that you get in trades because they get more XP than a regular Pokemon. So that kind of sucks, but that kind of gives you some options to reduce the grind. Some things that really just kind of flat out suck about this game, and it is what it is. This was the beginnings of Pokemon. For one, you don't get the EXP share to work in the way that it does nowadays. Nowadays, when you have the EXP share, it distributes experience to all of the Pokemon evenly, which is a nice way to reduce grind and to level up Pokemon more quickly. Some people like that feature, some people don't. I personally like it. I personally like it because it reduces grind. Like, I'm at an age where I really don't want to grind in my games, and so the less amount of grind that there is, for the most part, I tend to favor that. EXP share at this point in the game, at this point of Pokemon, it gives experience to 2 Pokemon. It gives it to the one who's in the battle, and it gives it to the one who's equipped with the EXP share. So this can help to keep 2 of your Pokemon balanced, but it's not really going to help with keeping the whole team balanced, unless you're just constantly moving the EXP share around. Another big problem with this game is that when your Pokemon levels up and they learn a new move, there's no information on what that new move does. Like, it would just tell me, hey, do you want to learn Hydro Pump? And if you don't know what Hydro Pump is, you're just going to have to gamble and be like, alright, well, let me just pick a move that I want to get rid of. And then all of a sudden you have a new move that maybe you don't even like all that much. It's also worth noting that technically, you can't really 100% this game. Pokemon has this catchphrase, you gotta catch them all. But Pokemon has been very good at making sure that you don't catch them all. In Generation 1, you had Mew. In Generation 2, now you have Celebi. And there's really no legitimate way to get Celebi, unless you were in Japan during this time. If you were in the States, there might have been some events that you could have gotten Celebi back in, 1999 or 2000, right? Nowadays, you're not getting Celebi, unless you use cheats. Then you can 100% this game. So that is one of the things that kind of sucks. When you have mythical Pokemon, I get the idea of wanting to have a really rare Pokemon that's just awesome to get your hands on. But usually those Pokemon, you have to go to some sort of event, or you have to buy multiple games to gain access to it. So it's, it's a whole thing. And of course, at this time of Pokemon, you have the HM skills. You had things like Cut, Fly, and Surf, and those helped you to navigate certain obstacles in the game. So effectively, you're either going to have to put certain HMs on certain Pokemon, or you're going to have an HM slave. Which that kind of sucks. That's just the way it is. I think an HM slave that I had was Raticate. You could also use Furret. And there's other Pokemon too, but yeah, it does kind of suck that you're stuck with the HMs. And it's just how the game is. This isn't really a review in the standard sense. I just really wanted to talk about this game briefly. Talk about how it impacted my life. Pokemon Gold was an excellent time for me. And I look fondly on the memories that I had with this game. If you haven't played it yet, I would recommend trying out Pokemon Crystal. If you're not interested in the Game Boy Color, but you're interested in the DS, I would 100% recommend Pokemon Heart Gold or Soul Silver. Those games are excellent games. They're so good. Some of the best Pokemon games ever made. But yeah, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for taking your time to be here. If you like, I would appreciate it if you liked the video or commented, shared, or subscribed. All of those things help out my channel, help support my work. But nevertheless, thank you for watching this video. I hope y'all have an excellent day, and y'all take care. I'll see you all later.